In this video, you are going to learn how to set up Firebase. So the first part of the video is going to require us to create a new account and set up our database via their website. In the second part of this video, we're actually going to connect to the Firebase database from our JavaScript code. We'll wrap the video up by writing a little bit of data, and all of this configuration is going to set us up for the rest of the section, where you're going to learn how to save data, remove data, fetch data, and update your data. Step one, though, is to create a new account. So I'm going to head over to firebase.google.com, and you're going to either need to sign in with your existing Google account or create a new one. From here on out, I am going to assume that you are signed in, and we're going to kick things off by just heading over to the console. I'm going to go to the console. This is going to require us to pick the Firebase app we want to work with. Now, I do have some existing apps. You might have some as well. If you don't have any, or you're seeing some sort of get started guide, you can actually just go ahead and close that down, and we're going to work through the process together. Right here, all we need to do is add a new project, and all we have to do to add the new project is to actually create a project name. I'm going to call this one Expensify. Now, we can keep the country and region the exact same as the default. I can then create the project, and this is going to bring us to the Firebase project dashboard. Now, Firebase has a whole bunch of features built in. A lot of the features we're not going to be taking advantage of. We're using Firebase for two big ones, their real-time database and their authentication system. So they do have other ones for hosting, they have functions, they have a test lab, and crash reporting stuff. We're not going to worry about that, and we're also not going to be doing the mobile integration. We're going to focus on the database for web and authentication for web. If we can integrate both of those, then we will have a completely production-ready Expensify app. Now, at its core, the Firebase database is a NoSQL database that resembles an object, a JavaScript object. So we have various key value pairs where our data is stored. The key is a string. The value is something like a string, a number, a Boolean, an array, or another object. So this is going to allow us to easily structure our data. To get started, let's head over to the database tab. Now, this is where later on we'll actually be able to view all of the data that makes up our application. For now, though, there is no data. We just have our application name right here. It is the name we provided with a randomly generated ID. This is the application ID, and we see the exact same thing in the URL up here. I have Expensify A13E6. Now on this page, all we really want to do is head over to the Rules tab. Rules allow us to configure who can read and write to the database, and they are a very important part of locking down your data, something we are going to cover a bit later in detail. For now though, we actually want to loosen up those rules, allowing anyone to read and write to the database. This is going to make it easy to explore the basics of Firebase without also having to cover authentication at the same time. So right here, we have a rules property on this object, and we have .read and .write. This lets us provide the global read and write rules. Currently, it just requires the user to be authenticated. I'm going to go ahead and remove this string right here and set it equal to true instead. This is going to allow anybody who has the database information to read from the database, and we're going to do the same thing with write. I'll remove the string and set it equal to the Boolean true. We'll fix these rules later to lock down the database, but for now, these rules are going to make it easy to get started. I'm going to go ahead and hit publish. This is going to actually publish these rules, and you can see right now we're getting a warning. Your security rules are defined as public. Anyone can read or write to your database, and this is perfectly fine. We're well aware of what we just did. We are just doing this to make life a little bit easier. So from here, there's really not a whole lot left to do inside of the Firebase website. I'm going to go back to the home page and click this guy right here, add Firebase to your web app. So adding Firebase to your web application is really easy. As you can see here, they are using a script tag to add it. We're going to install the npm library instead. Then we just have to take our configuration object, copy it into our code, and we'll be all done. We're going to learn how to break all of this out into environment variables a little bit later on, but for now, we will just actually take this object exactly as we see it here. Let's go ahead and install Firebase. We're going to do that by heading over to the terminal and using yarn. Over here, that's going to be yarn add. The module is Firebase, and we're going to be installing the version at 4.2.0, which is the latest. Now, once we do add this into the application, we're actually going to be able to use it. To do this, what we're going to do is create a new file in the source directory, and we're actually going to create a new folder too. So let's make a new folder. in source. I'm going to call this one Firebase. And in there, we're going to store, for the moment, a single file. The file will be called firebase.js. This is where we are going to actually connect to the database. So we're going to connect to the database once in this file, and then other files in our project can use the connection by just importing what we have here. For now, what we need to do is grab everything from Firebase, and the syntax for this is going to look a little different than you might expect. Since the syntax is a little different, let's just go through the line together, typing it out character by character, and then we'll come back and talk about what it does. That's going to be import, then a space, then an asterisk space, then the word as, space the word Firebase, and then from inside of quotes, the module Firebase. So the big difference is this stuff right here. This is stuff we haven't seen before, star as. So what this does is it takes all of the named exports from Firebase and it dumps them on a brand new variable called Firebase. Now this is required because Firebase doesn't have some sort of default export like this. This would be nice, but it's just not how it's set up. So when we add star as, we take all of those named exports and we create a new variable for them. Now we could do this with our own files as well if we had a file with multiple named exports. For example, we have actions, expenses. I could set up an import statement to grab all of these and dump them on some object. Now that might look a little bit like this. Import, star, as, expenses, actions, from, and then I would provide the path to the file. So I would go up a directory out of Firebase into actions, and then I would grab the expenses file. Now I'm going to have access to all sorts of things like expenses, actions, dot, and from here I have all of the methods that are actually named exports. So I have access to add expense, remove expense, and edit expense. So by adding star as, we're not really doing anything we haven't seen before. We're just setting it up a little bit differently. So instead of needing to manually grab all of those named exports, we can just grab all of them, toss them on a new variable, and then access them from that variable. The reason we're doing this is because this is recommended by Firebase, and a lot of the Firebase documentation and examples you're going to see out there use this exact same structure. So it's important to know exactly what it is and how it works. Now at this point, we can actually go ahead and make a connection to our database. Before we can though, we do need to grab that configuration object that we saw in the browser. So I'm going to head over there. I'm going to take this entire object. I'm going to copy it and I am going to paste it over inside of Visual Studio Code. Now we can go ahead and change this regular variable over to a const. We are not going to be doing any reassignment of config. And once we have this in place, the last thing we need to do to make the connection is to use the method shown right here, firebase.initializeApp. This is going to initialize Firebase to work with the specific application whose config you provided. So we can set that up down below, firebase.initialize app, and it takes in that configuration object. So all we have to do is pass in config. Now at this point, we should have a valid connection to the Firebase database. In the next video, we're going to learn in detail how we can write data, but I actually would like to add one statement real quick just to test our connection. If it works correctly, we know the connection was set up. If it doesn't work, then we know that something didn't go right so far. To add this line, we're just going to add a single statement down below. Now I'm going to gloss over some of the details. They're going to be covered in the next video where we talk about writing data in detail. For now though, we're just going to add the line in Firebase. Here we are going to access the database method. This gives us access to all of the database related features. As I mentioned, there are a lot of tools provided by Firebase. Database is just one of them. From here, we have to get a reference to somewhere in our database. Now we're going to learn a whole lot about this later. We can get a reference to the area where we store users. We can get a reference to the area where we store expenses, to-dos, notes, journal entries, whatever our app needs to store. For now, we're just going to call .ref, getting a reference to the root of our database. We'll talk about exactly how we can use this with arguments a little bit later. Next up, all we're going to do is call set. This lets us actually provide the data we want to set. I'm going to set something by passing in an object. On here, we provide the various key value pairs. And for our purposes, to just test this connection, I'm going to set name equal to the string Andrew Mead. Go ahead and use your name right there. We can then save the Firebase file and actually test this out. Now the Firebase file never gets imported by the application, so it's actually not going to run and the data will never get written because the file never runs. To fix this, we're just going to import it from app.js for the moment. I'm going to import right here. We don't need to grab anything, so we can just go ahead and move right on to the actual path. That would be ./Firebase/Firebase. So now the file will at least run when we start up the application, and this is going to allow us to confirm the connection was created successfully. Next up, we do have to start up the development server. So from the terminal, I'm going to use yarn run dev server to start that up. Once it is up, we're just going to visit localhost 8080 in the browser and see what we get. I'm going to switch over to that, refresh localhost 8080, and I am going to crack open the developer tools as well. Now down below in the console, we're not getting any errors, which is a good thing. It appears that everything went well. To actually test if the data was written correctly though, we can go over to the database Firebase dashboard right here. We're going to go over to the database tab. And what do we see here? We see our data showing up. So under Expensify, we have name was set to Andrew. If you're seeing your data here, then that means the database and the database connection were set up successfully, and you're ready to move on to the next video where you're going to learn about saving data in detail. Let's take just a quick moment to recap. In this video, we had to create a project on the Firebase dashboard, and we had to connect to the project using the Firebase module. We provided this really long configuration object, which contains what is equivalent to our password. We then pass it into initialize app, and this gave us access to the database where we were able to write some data. We're going to cover more about this in detail in the next one, so let's go ahead and jump over there.